My son chose a yacht in Mexico over his mother's open casket. He thought I was just a grieving, senile old man who would forgive him because he was my only child. He was wrong. I am Conrad Blackwood, and by the time he lands, he won't have a home to return to. Before I tell you how I destroyed his life with a single signature, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Like and subscribe if you believe respect is non-negotiable. The smell of lilies was suffocating. Beatrice hated lilies. She always said they smelled like funeral homes, like decay masked by cheap perfume. Yet here they were, massive arrangements of them flanking her coffin. I hadn't ordered them. Broderick had. He had ordered them online 3 days ago, charged them to my credit card, and probably felt that was enough of a contribution. I stood there, my hands clasped behind my back, staring at the mahogany wood. It was polished to a mirror finish reflecting the dim, recessed lighting of the chapel. The room was cold. Not the kind of cold that comes from air conditioning, but the deep, penetrating chill of absolute emptiness. The chapel was designed to hold 200 people. The pews were oak, lined with velvet cushions stretching back into the shadows. There were 5 of us. Me, my lawyer Wallace, who stood by the door like a sentinel, and 3 of Beatrice's old friends from the volunteer library board huddled together in the 3rd row, whispering in hushed, pitying tones. That was it. The front row, the padded bench reserved for immediate family, was empty. It gaped at me like a missing tooth. I looked at my watch. It was a Timex, scratched and reliable, the same one I had worn for 20 years. 2:16 in the afternoon. The service was scheduled for 2 o'clock. The funeral director, a man with a sympathetic tilt to his head that seemed practiced in a mirror, hovered in the periphery. He checked his clipboard. He looked at the door. He looked at me. "We can wait a few more minutes." "Mr. Blackwood," he said softly, "traffic in Chicago can be unpredictable." I didn't turn my head. "It is not traffic," I said. My voice sounded raspy like dry leaves scraping over concrete. I hadn't spoken much in 3 days. Not since the stroke. Not since I watched the machines flatline and felt the warmth leave Beatrice's hand. Wallace stepped forward. He didn't look at the director. He looked at me. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and tired. He knew. He had been my counsel for 30 years back when I was designing skyscrapers that scraped the clouds above the loop. He knew about the $8 million sitting in diversified accounts that nobody, especially not my son, knew about. He knew about the trust issues. He knew why I drove a 2010 Ford F-150 and wore suits that were 10 years out of style. Conrad Wallace said. His voice was low. "We should start." I looked at the empty space where my son should have been. Broderick, my only child, 40 years old, a man who still called himself an entrepreneur, despite never having run a profitable business in his life. Yesterday he had called me. His voice had been crackly, cutting in and out. "Dad, I am so sorry," he had said. "We are stuck in Denver. The blizzard is a nightmare. All flights are grounded. We are trying to rent a car, but the roads are closed." "I am devastated, Dad. Tell Mom I love her." I had believed him. Why wouldn't I? Beatrice would have believed him. She would have worried about him driving in the snow. She would have told him to stay safe, that the funeral was just a ceremony, that his safety mattered more. That was Beatrice. Always giving, always forgiving, even when he drained us dry. I took a breath. The air tasted stale. "Let's begin," I said. The service was short. The pastor, a young man who didn't know us, spoke generic words about peace and rest. He talked about Beatrice's kindness, reading from a card I had written for him. He didn't know about the nights she stayed up worrying about Broderick's gambling debts. He didn't know about the second mortgage we took out 10 years ago to pay off his legal fees. He didn't know that the stroke hit her exactly 1 hour after she argued with Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, over the phone. I stood as still as a statue. I didn't cry. I couldn't. The rage was a hot, solid knot in my chest, burning up any tears before they could form. I looked at Beatrice. Her face was made up too heavily, her lips painted a shade of pink she never wore. She looked like a cult. Not my wife. My wife was the woman who gardened in muddy boots. My wife was the woman who laughed with her whole body. This was just a shell, and her son wasn't even here to say goodbye to it. My phone vibrated in the inside pocket of my jacket. It was a sharp, aggressive buzz against my ribs. I ignored it. It buzzed again, and again, a relentless, demanding rhythm. I frowned. Only a few people had this number. Broderick, Wallace, the alarm company. I reached into my pocket. The movement felt heavy, like moving through water. I pulled out the phone. The screen lit up in the dim chapel, a beacon of blue light. It wasn't a call. It was a notification. Instagram Vanessa Queen Bee is live now. My thumb hovered over the screen. Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, the influencer. The woman who spent more on handbags in a month than Beatrice spent on groceries in a year. If they were stuck in a blizzard in Denver, why was she live streaming? Maybe they were stuck in the airport. Maybe she was updating the family. I tapped the notification. The silence of the funeral home was instantly shattered. The sound didn't come from the room. It came from my hand. Tinny, distorted but unmistakably loud electronic dance music pumped from the phone speaker. The pastor stopped mid-sentence. The three ladies in the back row gasped. I fumbled to turn the volume down, my fingers stiff, but not before the image seared itself into my retinas. It wasn't a snowstorm. It wasn't an airport terminal. The screen was filled with blindingly bright, turquoise water. Sunlight glared off white leather seats. A yacht. They were on a yacht. I muted the sound, but I didn't close the app. I stared at it. My vision tunneled. The chapel disappeared. The coffin disappeared. All I could see was that small rectangle of light. The camera panned around. There was a bucket of ice, a bottle of Dom Perignon champagne, a platter of exotic fruit. And then there he was. Broderick, my son. He was wearing oversized aviator sunglasses and a white linen shirt unbuttoned to his sternum. He was tan. Deeply tan. You don't get that tan in a blizzard in Denver. He was laughing, his head thrown back, his mouth open wide as he caught a grape Vanessa threw at him. He looked healthy. He looked rich. He looked happy. Vanessa turned the camera to herself. She was wearing a bikini that cost more than my suit. She wore a tiara that said "Birthday Girl." She blew a kiss to the camera. "Who cares about sad vibes today?" she captioned the video. 32 and thriving. Cabo is paradise. Cabo, Mexico. The math hit me like a physical blow. The flight to Cabo, the yacht rental, the champagne, the hotel. It had to be at least $15,000. $15,000. My mind flashed back to 4 days ago. Beatrice was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands shaking as she logged into her retirement account. Broderick had called. He was crying. He said he had a medical procedure, something with his heart, and his insurance wouldn't cover it. He needed $15,000 or they wouldn't operate. Beatrice had drained the account. She sent it. She said, "Conrad, it is his heart. We have to." It wasn't his heart. It was this. It was a yacht in Cabo San Lucas. It was a birthday party for a woman who had called Beatrice a useless old hag 3 weeks ago. I watched Broderick raise his glass in the video. He shouted something that the mute button suppressed, but I could read his lips. To the good life. He was drinking his mother's life savings while her body lay 10 feet away from me. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't scream. A strange, icy calm washed over me. It was the kind of calm I used to feel when I was a lead architect standing on a construction site realizing a load-bearing wall was compromised. Panic doesn't solve structural failure. Calculated demolition does. I took a screenshot. The image captured Broderick laughing, the champagne bottle tilted toward his lips. Then I opened my messages. I found the thread with Broderick. The last message from him was a text sent yesterday. "So sorry, Dad. Snow is piling up. Love you." I typed 3 words. "Do not return." I hit send. I watched the little bubble appear. Delivered. Read. I waited. I expected dots. I expected a typing indicator. I expected a lie about how this was old footage or how they had been rerouted miraculously to Mexico. Instead, the profile picture at the top of the chat simply vanished. The name Broderick Blackwood turned into a generic gray silhouette. The message history remained, but the connection was severed. User not found. He blocked me. He saw the message. He knew I knew. And instead of calling, instead of apologizing, he blocked his father at his mother's funeral so he wouldn't have to deal with the buzzkill. He chose the party. He chose the lie. I put the phone back in my pocket. The weight of it felt different now. It wasn't a communication device anymore. It was evidence. I looked up. The pastor was watching me, unsure whether to continue. Wallace had stepped closer, his face etched with concern. He had seen the screen. He had seen the yacht. "Mr. Blackwood," the pastor asked tentatively. "Finish it," I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice I used in boardrooms when I fired incompetent contractors. "Just finish the service." The rest of the funeral passed in a blur. I didn't hear the prayers. I didn't hear the hymns. I was busy. I was building a new structure in my mind. I was tearing down the old blueprints of my life, the ones that included leaving the house to Broderick, the ones that included a trust fund for grandchildren that would never exist, the ones that included forgiveness. I was designing a trap. When the service ended, the 3 ladies from the library came up to me. They patted my arm with gloved hands. They murmured about how tragic it was that the storm kept Broderick away. "Poor boy," one said. "He must be heartbroken missing this." I didn't correct them. I nodded. I let them believe the lie. The truth was not for them. The truth was a weapon, and I wasn't ready to fire it yet. They left. The funeral director left to prepare the hearse for the cemetery. It was just me and Wallace in the chapel. The silence returned, but now it wasn't empty. It was charged. "It was electric," Conrad Wallace said. He adjusted his glasses. He looked angry. "I have known Wallace for 40 years. He is a man of the law, a man of procedure. He rarely gets angry." But his hands were clenched into fists. "I saw the screen, Conrad. Was that Cabo?" "Yes," I said. "And the money Beatrice sent for his heart operation," I said. Wallace let out a breath that sounded like a curse. "What do you want to do?" I turned to look at him. I straightened my tie. I felt stronger than I had in years. The grief was still there, a massive dark ocean, but on top of it, a battleship had launched. "Is the file ready?" I asked. Wallace paused. He knew which file. We had discussed it hypothetically 5 years ago when Broderick had stolen my identity to take out a credit card. I had backed down then. Beatrice had begged me not to do it. She said he would change. "The Omega file," Wallace said. "Yes, it is ready. It has been ready. I just need your signature to activate the protocols." "Execute it," I said. Wallace nodded slowly. "You know what this means, Conrad. Once we trigger this, there is no going back. It is a scorched earth policy. We freeze everything. The accounts, the assets, the future inheritance. We transfer the title of the house. We empty the visible coffers." "I know," I said. And Broderick Wallace asked, "When he comes back, and he will come back when the cards stop working." I looked at the coffin one last time. I touched the cold wood. Goodbye, Beatrice. I am sorry I couldn't save you from them, but I will save your memory. I turned my back on the altar. I looked at Wallace. When he comes back, I said he won't find his father. He will find a poor, lonely old man living in a house he doesn't own, with no money to his name. Wallace smiled. It was a sharp, shark-like smile. The irrevocable trust. Exactly, I said. Move the $8 million into the Beatrice Blackwood Charity Fund. Tonight. I want the transfer time-stamped before midnight. I want the deed to the house transferred to the shell company by tomorrow morning. And the debts, Wallace asked. Broderick's debts that are co-signed in your name. I stopped at the door of the chapel. The daylight outside looked harsh and gray. Stop paying them, I said. Stop paying all of them. Let the creditors call. Let the repo men come. I want him to feel the wind. Wallace opened his briefcase and pulled out a notepad. He made a single note. Done. I walked out into the parking lot. My old Ford F-150 was parked alone in the vast asphalt sea. It was rusted around the wheel wells. The paint was peeling on the hood. To the world, it was the truck of a retired man struggling to get by. To Broderick, it was an embarrassment. He had told me once to park it down the street when he brought friends over. I got in. The engine roared to life with a familiar rattling cough. I didn't go home. I drove to the cemetery for the burial. I stood there alone as they lowered Beatrice into the ground. I threw the first shovel of dirt. It hit the lid with a hollow thud. Rest now, I whispered. The work is done. I drove home in silence. The house was dark when I arrived. It was a large house, 4 bedrooms, Victorian style, in a neighborhood that had gentrified around us. It was worth $1.2 million. Broderick had been salivating over it for years. He called it his nest egg. He had already hired an architect to draw up plans to gut it and turn it into a modern glass box once we were gone. I walked into the kitchen. It smelled of Beatrice's cinnamon tea. Her mug was still by the sink. I sat down at the table. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark and waited. I checked my banking app. Pending transaction, $15,000. Recipient B. Blackwood. I checked the credit card statement. Pending transaction, $4,200. The Ritz-Carlton Cabo San Lucas. Pending transaction, $800. VIP Club access. He was using my card. He hadn't just used the cash Beatrice sent. He was using the supplementary card I had given him for emergencies to pay for his hotel. I picked up the landline. I dialed the number on the back of the card. Representative, I said to the automated voice. When the woman came on the line, her voice was cheerful. How can I help you today, Mr. Blackwood? I would like to report a theft, I said. Oh no, did you lose your card? No, I said. I know exactly where it is, but the person using it does not have my authorization. Cancel it. Mark all charges from the last 48 hours as fraudulent. Sir, if we do that, the card will be declined immediately. If the person is at a hotel, they will be evicted, I finished. That is the point. There was a pause. I see. We are processing that now. The card is dead. Thank you. I hung up. I sat back in the chair. I closed my eyes. I imagined the scene. The waiter bringing the bill for another bottle of champagne. The card being swiped. The red light. The decline. The confusion. The second try. The manager coming over. It was petty. It was small. But it was the first brick in the wall I was building. My phone buzzed again. It wasn't a notification this time. It was a text from Wallace. Transfer initiated. Trust established. House deed transfer scheduled for 9 a.m. You are officially a pauper, Conrad. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. 2 days passed. I didn't leave the house. I fed Beatrice's dog, a golden retriever named Barnaby, who spent the whole time lying by the front door waiting for her. I packed up Beatrice's clothes, not to get rid of them, but to protect them. I moved my safe, the one hidden in the floorboards of the basement, and emptied it. Passports, gold coins, the backup drive with my crypto keys. I moved everything to a safety deposit box at a bank across town that Broderick didn't know I used. On the third morning at 7 a.m., I heard it, the sound of a car door slamming, then another. I looked out the window. A taxi was pulling away. Standing on the sidewalk were Broderick and Vanessa. They looked like wrecks. Their tans were peeling. Their clothes were wrinkled. They had luggage, but it looked hastily packed. They looked hungover and furious. Vanessa was shouting something at Broderick. Broderick was waving his arms. He kicked at the gate. He kicked my dog Barnaby, who had run out to the fence to bark. He kicked my dog. The rage that had been a cold knot turned into a white-hot flare. I opened the front door. I stood on the porch in my bathrobe holding a cup of black coffee. They stopped arguing when they saw me. They walked up the path. They didn't look ashamed. They didn't look sad. They looked entitled. Broderick walked right up to the steps. He smelled of stale tequila and airplane air. "Dad," he said. His voice was rough. "We have a problem." He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how the funeral was. He didn't ask how I was. "We have a problem," he repeated. The card stopped working. We were thrown out of the hotel. We had to beg for cash to get a flight home. What the hell is going on with the accounts? I took a sip of coffee. I looked at Vanessa. She was wearing huge sunglasses, but I could see the scowl. She was tapping her foot. "The accounts are closed," I said. "What do you mean closed?" Vanessa snapped. "We have bills to pay. We have the car lease. I interrupted. "I don't have a lease, but you have a lease, Suts." Broderick stepped forward. He tried to intimidate me. He used his height, a trick he learned in high school. "Dad, stop playing games. I know you're upset we missed the funeral, but the storm..." I pulled out my phone. I opened the photo gallery. I held up the screen. The screenshot of him on the yacht. The sun, the champagne, the blizzard in Cabo looks tropical, I said. Broderick froze. His face went pale, then red. Vanessa scoffed. "You were stalking us." "Seriously." That was a mental health break. Broderick was grieving. He needed to get away. He needed to get away from his mother's funeral, I asked. "He handles grief differently," she yelled. I looked at Broderick. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the house. He was looking at the windows, assessing the value. "Look, Dad," he said. "I'm sorry, okay, we messed up. But we are here now, and we need to talk business." "Business?" I asked. Broderick took a breath. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. It was crumpled. "I need $250,000, he said. I almost laughed. It was so absurd. "Excuse me, I need 250 grand. Today. My company, we have a cash flow issue. A temporary thing. But if I don't pay this bridge loan by noon, they are going to liquidate my assets." "You don't have any assets." "Broderick," I said. "You rent your condo. You lease your car." "I have the business," he shouted. "And Mom promised me." He looked me in the eye. He lied to my face, invoking the name of the woman he had just ignored in death. "Mom promised me before she died. She said she would give me the money to save the company. She said you would sign the check." I stared at him. I knew he was lying. I knew it because I had checked the security camera footage from Beatrice's bedroom the night before she died. I had seen Vanessa sneak in. I had seen her rummaging through the medicine cabinet. I had heard her screaming at Beatrice. "You stingy old witch, why don't you just die and save us the trouble?" That was the conversation that caused the stroke. And now here he was claiming his mother wanted to give him $250,000. I realized then that this wasn't just about greed. This was about survival. He was in trouble. Deep trouble. You don't ask for that much cash by noon unless you owe money to people who break legs. I looked at him. I looked at Vanessa. I took another sip of coffee. "Come inside," I said. Broderick let out a sigh of relief. He thought he had won. He thought I was the same old Conrad who would fold to keep the peace. "Thanks, Dad," he said, pushing past me. "I knew you'd understand." I watched them walk into the house. They didn't wipe their feet. I closed the door. I locked it. Let's see, I thought. I didn't say yes. I just said, "Come inside." The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for them to step on the trigger. The silence of the house was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against my eardrums. It was 7 in the morning, 2 days after I had buried my wife alone. The coffee in my mug had gone cold, a black bitter pool that reflected my own exhaustion. Barnaby, Beatrice's old golden retriever, was snoring softly by the refrigerator vent, his gray muzzle twitching in a dream where his mistress was still alive to feed him bacon scraps. I envied him that dream. Then the silence shattered. It wasn't a knock. It was a pounding, a rhythmic, entitled thudding against the oak front door that shook the frame. Barnaby scrambled up, his claws clicking frantically on the linoleum, letting out a confused, raspy bark. I didn't rush. I stood up slowly, feeling the stiffness in my knees, and walked down the hallway. Through the frosted glass I could see 2 distorted silhouettes, one tall and looming, the other shorter and agitated. I unlocked the deadbolt. I hadn't even turned the knob fully before the door was shoved open from the outside. Broderick and Vanessa spilled into the entryway like a toxic spill. The smell hit me instantly. It was a nauseating cocktail of stale airport whiskey, coconut tanning oil, and unwashed bodies. They looked like a car crash in slow motion. Broderick's face was a map of sunburn, his nose peeling in white flakes, his eyes bloodshot and rimmed with red. He was wearing a neon tank top that read Cabo Cantina, a garment so inappropriate for a house of mourning that it felt like a slap in the face. Vanessa was worse. Her hair, usually extensions of perfect platinum, was a tangled bird's nest. She dragged a Louis Vuitton suitcase that was scuffed and muddy, bumping it loudly over the threshold. Neither of them looked at me. Neither of them said hello. "What is wrong with the gate code?" Broderick barked, pushing past me. "We have been trying to get in for 10 minutes. Do you have any idea how cold it is out there?" He was shivering, his skin radiating heat from the Mexican sun, clashing violently with the Chicago chill. He didn't ask about his mother. He didn't ask about the service. He didn't ask how I was holding up in this empty, echoing house. He just marched into the living room and threw his keys on the side table, knocking over a framed photo of Beatrice. The glass cracked. He didn't even look down. "We need to talk about the bank," Vanessa snapped, dropping her suitcase in the middle of the hall. "This is insane, Conrad. Absolutely insane. Do you know how embarrassing it is to have your card declined at the duty-free? I couldn't even buy water." She looked at me, then her eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses, but I could feel the glare. Her lips were chapped and drawn into a thin, cruel line. I closed the door quietly. The click of the latch was the only punctuation to their noise. "Did you have a nice flight?" I asked. My voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. Broderick spun around. His movements were jerky, the hangover clearly pounding behind his eyes. "Don't start, Dad. Just don't. We went through hell to get back here. The connection in Houston was a nightmare. We had to sit in economy." Economy. He said the word like it was a terminal disease. He began pacing the rug, his sandy footprints staining the fabric Beatrice had vacuumed every Tuesday for 20 years. "Where are the papers?" he demanded, stopping abruptly. "What papers?" I asked, staying by the door. The transfer papers, Broderick said, his voice rising. For the house and the check, you said you would handle the liquidity issue while we were gone. I have suppliers calling me Dad. I have deadlines. I stared at him. He was hallucinating. I had never said I would handle anything. I had told him not to come back. But in his mind, in that twisted narrative he lived in, I was still the ATM, the fixer, the silent wallet that opened whenever he whined. Barnaby, sensing the tension, trotted into the living room. His tail wagged slowly, uncertainly. He recognized Broderick. He loved Broderick despite everything. The old dog approached Vanessa, sniffing at the strange smells on her leggings, looking for a pat, a greeting, anything. Vanessa didn't break stride. "Get away from me, you filthy rug!" she shrieked. She didn't just step aside. She drew back her foot encased in a heavy designer sneaker and kicked him. It wasn't a stumble. It was a sharp, vicious punt to the ribs. Barnaby yelped a high-pitched sound of pain and betrayal that tore through the room. He scrambled backward, his paws slipping on the hardwood, and cowered under the dining table, shaking. The sound of that yelp snapped something inside me. It was the final tether holding back the flood. "Hey!" I shouted. The volume of my own voice surprised me. It echoed off the walls. Broderick blinked, looking at me as if the furniture had suddenly started speaking. Vanessa just rolled her eyes, dusting off her leggings, as if the dog had contaminated her. "He reeks," she muttered. "You really need to put that thing down. It's depressing." I looked at my son. I waited for him to defend the dog he had grown up with. I waited for him to tell his wife that kicking a defenseless animal was unacceptable. I waited for a flicker of humanity. Broderick just rubbed his temples. "Can we focus, please? The dog is fine. We have bigger problems." "Dad, seriously, where's the checkbook? I need to make a deposit by noon, or things are going to get ugly." He walked into the kitchen, opening the refrigerator and staring blankly at the contents. "Nothing to eat." "Seriously, we are starving." He grabbed a bottle of orange juice and drank straight from the carton, spilling some on his chin. He wiped it with the back of his hand. I watched them. They were like locusts. They had been in the house for less than 5 minutes, and already the air felt polluted. They hadn't asked about the grave. They hadn't asked if there was a wake. They didn't care that Beatrice was in the cold ground while they stood there demanding money to cover their sins. They thought they had come home to conquer. They thought I was just an obstacle, a senile old gatekeeper to the family vault. I walked over to the table and knelt down. I reached out a hand to Barnaby. He licked my fingers, his eyes wide and fearful. I stood up. I looked at the cracked photo frame on the floor. I looked at the mud on the carpet. I looked at the juice carton left open on the counter. "You want to talk about papers?" I said. Broderick turned, relief washing over his face. "Yes, thank God. Let's get this done." "Where do I sign?" I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just walked past him toward my study. "Come with me," I said. They followed me, eager and blind, walking straight into the slaughterhouse. My study was a sanctuary of dark wood and dust motes, dancing in the shafts of light that pierced through the heavy velvet curtains. It smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco, a scent Beatrice used to say reminded her of safety. Now Broderick and Vanessa stood in the center of the room, polluting that safety with their frenetic, desperate energy. Broderick didn't sit. He paced the Persian rug, his hands balling into fists, and then releasing over and over like a mechanical tick. Vanessa leaned against a bookshelf, running a manicured finger over the spines of my first editions, looking at them not as literature but as potential eBay listings. "Sit down," I said, lowering myself into my leather wingback chair. The leather creaked, a sound that seemed too loud in the tense silence. Broderick stopped pacing. He turned to me, his eyes wide and unblinking. "I don't have time to sit, Dad. I told you, noon. The deadline is noon." He reached into the back pocket of his designer jeans and pulled out a document. It wasn't a formal contract. It was a sheet of lined notebook paper folded into a tight square. He smoothed it out on my desk, pressing it down with a palm that left a damp sweat mark on the mahogany. "Read this," he commanded. I put on my reading glasses. I didn't need them. My vision was excellent, but they were a prop. They made me look older, slower, more like the confused retiree they wanted to see. I picked up the paper. The ink was blue ballpoint. The handwriting was looped and flowing with large, confident capitals. To my dearest son Broderick, it read, "I know you are struggling with the business. Please take the money from the retirement savings. Take $250,000. It is yours. Save the company. Make me proud. I love you. Mom." I stared at the paper. I stared at the signature at the bottom. Beatrice Blackwood. It was a forgery, and it wasn't even a good one. Beatrice had suffered from severe arthritis in her hands for the last 5 years. Her handwriting had become small, jagged, and painful to look at. Writing a grocery list took her 20 minutes. This note was written by someone with a steady hand and a flair for the dramatic. Someone like Vanessa, who fancied herself a calligrapher because she watched lettering videos on TikTok. The audacity of it made bile rise in my throat. They had forged a dead woman's dying wish to cover their gambling debts. "Mom wrote this," Broderick said, his voice thick with a fake wobble. "The night before she died. She called me into the bedroom. She was lucid, Dad. She knew I was in trouble. She said, 'Broderick, take the money. Don't let your father stop you. He doesn't understand business.' He looked at me, challenging me to call him a liar. She wanted me to have it." He continued, gaining momentum. "She said the accounts were joint. She said you would honor her wish." I looked up at him over the rim of my glasses. $250,000, I repeated slowly. "Beatrice wanted you to have $250,000. To save the legacy." Broderick shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. "My company is the family legacy now. Do you want to see me fail? Do you want to see me on the street?" "And the house," Vanessa interjected. She pushed off the bookshelf and walked toward the desk, her hips swaying. She placed a manicured hand on Broderick's shoulder, a gesture of support that looked more like a handler controlling a pit bull. "We need the deed, Conrad. Broderick needs collateral for a bridge loan. The cash is for immediate liquidity, but the house is the safety net." "Transfer the title to me," Broderick said. "A quitclaim deed. We can notarize it online. It takes 10 minutes. Once the house is in my name, the bank will extend my line of credit. It's just a formality, Dad. You can still live here." He added the last part as an afterthought, a crumb tossed to a pigeon. "You can still live here. In my own house. The house I bought in 1982. The house I had paid off 3 decades ago." "Mom agreed to this too," Broderick lied effortlessly. "She said the house was too big for you two. She wanted us to leverage it. She said it was a waste of equity, just sitting here." I looked at the forged note. I looked at my son. He was vibrating with adrenaline and fear. I realized then that he wasn't just asking. He was demanding. And he was dangerous. If I said no, if I threw the paper in his face and told him I knew about the forgery, about the abuse, about the yacht, he might snap. He was 6'2", desperate, and likely indebted to people who didn't use lawyers to collect. I was 72. I was alone in the house with them. I saw his eyes dart to the heavy brass letter opener on my desk. I couldn't fight him physically, and if I flat out refused, they might change tactics immediately. They might call the police and claim I was having a psychotic episode. They might try to have me committed right now using his concern for my grief as a cover. I had to be smarter. I had to be the architect. I had to let them think the foundation was solid while I pulled the pins from the support beams. I let my hand tremble as I put the paper down. I took off my glasses and rubbed my eyes, feigning exhaustion. I didn't know, I stammered. Beatrice never told me. She didn't want to worry you, Vanessa said quickly, her voice taking on a sickeningly sweet, condescending tone. She knew you get anxious about money, Conrad. She wanted to handle it. She wanted to be the hero for her son. 250,000, I mumbled, staring at the desk. That is most of the liquid savings. It's an investment, Broderick insisted. I'll pay it back. With interest. Double. Triple. Once the deal in Dubai goes through. But I need the cash now. And the deed. He slid a second document across the desk. It was a printed quitclaim deed form already filled out. It transferred ownership of 42 Oakwood Drive from Conrad and Beatrice Blackwood to Broderick Blackwood. Sign it, he said. We can get the cash transfer started while the deed processes. I looked at the pen he was holding out to me. It was a cheap plastic stick pen he must have grabbed from the bank. I reached for it, letting my hand shake visibly. I hovered the pen over the paper. Broderick held his breath. Vanessa leaned in her eyes, glittering with greed. Then I dropped the pen. I can't, I whispered. What? Broderick's face darkened. What do you mean you can't? I don't have the login tokens. I lied. For the big transfers. Beatrice handled the online banking. She changed the passwords last month because of the hackers on the news. She kept the security tokens in her safe deposit box. It was a lie. I managed everything. But they didn't know that. They had never cared enough to ask how the bills were paid. And the deed, Broderick demanded. You don't need a password for the deed. Just sign the damn paper. I need the original deed, I said, my voice rising in a panic that felt half real. To get the parcel number. To verify the easement lines. If we file it wrong, the county will reject it. You know how bureaucracy is. It could lock up the title for months. I saw the word months hit Broderick like a physical blow. He didn't have months. He probably didn't have days. Where is the original deed? He barked. In the safety deposit box, I said, with the tokens. Then let's go, Vanessa said, grabbing her car keys. The bank opens in 20 minutes. We'll drive you. I shook my head. I can't go today. I feel faint. My heart. The doctor said I need to rest. The stress of the funeral. I clutched my chest. It was a cliché, but effective. Broderick looked at me with pure loathing. He didn't care about my heart. He cared about the delay. We don't have time for your heart, Dad, he shouted. Broderick, Vanessa warned. She looked at me, calculating. If he has a heart attack before he signs, the assets go into probate. We'll be stuck in court for a year. Broderick flinched. He knew she was right. Dead, I was a legal mess. Alive and compliant, I was a goldmine. Fine, Broderick spat. Fine. You rest. But tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. sharp, we are going to the bank. You get the deed. You get the tokens. And you sign everything. Do you understand me? I nodded weakly. Yes. Yes, of course, for Beatrice, for the legacy. Good, Broderick said. He snatched the forged note off the desk and shoved it back into his pocket. We're staying here tonight. In my old room. Don't wait up. He turned and stormed out of the study. Vanessa lingered for a second. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing behind her sunglasses. She sensed something was off, but her greed blinded her to the reality. She saw a weak old man. She didn't see the wolf in sheep's clothing. Don't disappoint him, Conrad, she hissed. He's under a lot of pressure. You don't want to see what happens when he snaps. She turned on her heel and followed him. I sat alone in the silence of the study. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It was beating with a slow, heavy rhythm tomorrow morning. 8 a.m. They thought they had given me an ultimatum. In reality, they had given me 24 hours. I picked up the plastic pen from the floor. I snapped it in half. I reached for my burner phone, the one hidden in the bottom drawer, and texted Wallace. Phase 2. They took the bait. Prepare the bait and switch for the deposit box. And get me the file on Broderick's investors. I want to know exactly who owns my son. The house was finally quiet. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 3 times, a hollow sound that vibrated through the floorboards. Upstairs, in the room that used to be Broderick's, the floorboards creaked rhythmically. My son and his wife were sleeping the sleep of the remorseless, likely dreaming of the fortune they thought they had secured. I sat in the dark of the kitchen, the blue light of my laptop illuminating my hands. They were steady now. The trembling had stopped hours ago, replaced by a cold, vibrating clarity. I wasn't just an old man grieving. I was a forensic analyst dissecting the crime scene of my life. I logged into the cloud server for the home security system. Beatrice had insisted we install cameras in the master bedroom 6 months ago after she had a dizzy spell. She was afraid she would fall when I was out in the garden and no one would know. I had agreed, thinking it was a precaution for her health. I never imagined it would become the witness to her execution. I scrolled back through the timeline. Not to yesterday. Not to the day of the funeral. I went back 3 weeks, the night of the stroke. The timestamp on the screen read 11:42 p.m. I pressed play. The video was in high-definition black and white night vision. Beatrice was in bed, propped up against 3 pillows, reading her Bible. She looked frail. Her hands, even in the grainy footage, looked painful and curled. The bedroom door opened. It wasn't me. I had been downstairs falling asleep in front of the History Channel. It was Vanessa. She didn't knock. She didn't whisper. She slunk into the room like a feral cat wearing a silk robe that I recognized as one Beatrice had bought for herself, but never worn because Vanessa had borrowed it permanently. Vanessa walked straight to the vanity table. She began opening drawers, not quietly, but with a frantic, aggressive energy. She was looking for something specific. On screen, Beatrice lowered her Bible. I turned up the volume on my laptop. Vanessa, what are you doing? Beatrice's voice was thin, reedy. Vanessa spun around. She held up a small orange prescription bottle. It was the oxycodone Beatrice had been prescribed after her hip surgery a year ago. She hated them. She kept them only for emergencies. I need these, Vanessa said. Her voice wasn't slurred, but it had the sharp, jagged edge of a chemical craving. Those are expired, Beatrice said, and they are not yours. Put them back. Vanessa laughed. It was a cruel, ugly sound. Oh, shut up, you old bat. You don't use them. You just hoard them, just like you hoard the money, just like you hoard this big, stupid house. Vanessa, please leave, Beatrice said. She reached for the panic button on her nightstand, the one linked to my phone. Vanessa crossed the room in 2 strides. She slapped Beatrice's hand away. Don't you dare, she hissed. I watched, my breath caught in my throat as my daughter-in-law leaned over my wife. She was inches from her face. You are useless, Vanessa spat. Do you know that Broderick is drowning in debt because of you? Because you won't sign the checks. You sit here like a queen on a pile of cash while we suffer. Why don't you just die? The words hung in the air, recorded forever in digital audio. Why don't you just die and save us the trouble? Beatrice gasped. On the screen, her hand flew to her chest. Her eyes went wide. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She began to shake. The monitor on the nightstand, her heart rate monitor, began to flash red. Help, Beatrice wheezed. My pills. Nitroglycerin. The bottle of heart medication was right there, on the nightstand, next to the lamp. Vanessa looked at Beatrice. She looked at the flashing monitor. Then she looked at the heart medication. She didn't reach for it. She took a step back. She crossed her arms. She watched. "You're so dramatic," Vanessa scoffed. "Stop acting. It's pathetic." Beatrice convulsed. Her water glass tipped over, shattering on the hardwood floor. She slumped sideways, half off the mattress. Vanessa stood there for a full 10 seconds. 10 seconds is an eternity when someone is dying. She watched the life drain out of the woman who had welcomed her into this family, who had paid for her wedding dress, who had defended her when I called her a gold digger. When Beatrice stopped moving, Vanessa didn't call 911. She didn't scream for me. She reached out, grabbed the bottle of oxycodone she had come for, and walked out of the room. She closed the door gently behind her. The video continued. I saw myself run into the room 5 minutes later, alerted by the silence rather than the noise. I saw myself trying CPR. I saw the paramedics arrive. But the crime had already been committed. I paused the video. I stared at the frozen image of the closed door. This wasn't negligence. This wasn't a family dispute. This was depraved indifference. This was manslaughter. Maybe even murder. She had triggered the event, denied the aid, and left her to die. And Broderick, he knew. He had to know. The promise he claimed Beatrice made, the promise of money, it was a fabrication born from this moment. Vanessa had told him Beatrice was dead, and his first thought wasn't grief. It was opportunity. I closed the laptop. I felt a physical shift in my chest, as if a steel door had slammed shut on my heart. For the last 3 days, I had been operating on the principle of tough love. I wanted to teach them a lesson. I wanted them to be poor so they would learn to be humble. That was over. You don't teach lessons to murderers. You don't rehabilitate cancer. You cut it out. You burn it until there is nothing left but ash. I picked up my burner phone. I dialed Wallace. It was 3 a.m. He answered on the first ring. "I have something for the police," I said. "Not yet," Wallace replied. His voice was sharp. "Conrad, listen to me. If you give that to the police now, they will arrest her." "Maybe. But a good lawyer will argue she didn't know it was a stroke. They will argue it was an argument gone wrong. She might walk with a slap on the wrist and a probation officer." "I don't want a slap on the wrist," I said. "I want her life over." "Then wait," Wallace said. "Let them dig the hole deeper. Let them commit the fraud. Let them sign the papers tomorrow. Let them steal the car. Let them incriminate themselves so thoroughly that when we drop the hammer, they go away for 20 years, not 2. He was right. As much as I wanted to run upstairs and drag her out of bed by her hair, I knew that immediate satisfaction was the enemy of permanent justice. I saved the video file. I copied it to 3 separate encrypted drives. I emailed a copy to a secure server in Switzerland. I stood up. I walked to the sink and washed my face with ice-cold water. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. The man looking back at me wasn't a father anymore. He wasn't a husband. He was an executioner. I went back to the living room. I unlocked the front door. I checked the lock on the basement door, where the true valuables used to be. Tomorrow they wanted to play games with deeds and bank accounts. Tomorrow they wanted to act like the masters of the universe. I would let them. I would play the confused, grieving old man for exactly as long as it took to get their signatures on the dotted line of their own destruction. I sat in the armchair facing the stairs. I watched the shadows lengthen as the sun began to rise. I waited for them to wake up. I waited for the show to begin. The morning sun hit the kitchen table with a brightness that felt offensive. I sat there, my hands resting on the placemat, and I made them tremble. It is harder than you think to fake a tremor. You have to tense the muscles in your forearm, locking them against each other until the vibration travels down to the fingertips. I stared at my own hand, watching it shake like a leaf in a gale, and for a moment I wondered if I was acting or if the rage was simply vibrating out of my bones. Broderick was pacing again. He had changed into one of my old sweaters, which was too tight in the shoulders, making him look like an overgrown child playing dress-up. He was checking his watch every 30 seconds. "Dad, we have to go," he said, his voice tight with a mixture of impatience and panic. "The bank opens in 20 minutes. You need to find the keys to the safety deposit box." I looked up at him. I let my eyes unfocus. I let my jaw go slack. I looked through him, not at him, who I asked. My voice was a whisper, thin and reedy. Broderick stopped pacing. He stared at me. "Dad, what do you mean who it is me?" "Broderick, your son." I blinked slowly. I looked around the kitchen as if I had never seen it before. I looked at the coffee maker. I looked at the empty chair where Beatrice used to sit. "Where is Beatrice?" I asked. "Is she in the garden?" "It is Tuesday. She prunes the roses on Tuesday." Broderick froze. He looked at Vanessa, who was leaning against the counter scrolling on her phone. She looked up, her eyes narrowing. "He is losing it," she mouthed. Broderick stepped closer. He put his hands on the table and leaned in. "Dad, Mom passed away. Remember? The funeral was 3 days ago." I frowned. "That can't be right," I muttered. "She was just here. She made the cinnamon tea. I can smell it." I wasn't smelling tea. I was smelling the lie I was constructing. I saw the look pass between them. It wasn't concern. It was delight. It was the look of two predators realizing the gazelle has a broken leg. If I was senile, if I was confused, their plan became infinitely easier. They wouldn't need to force me to sign. They could just guide my hand. They wouldn't need to argue. They could just declare me incompetent. Vanessa pushed off the counter. She walked over to me, her heels clicking on the tile. She put a hand on my shoulder. Her nails were painted a sharp, violent red. "Conrad," she said, her voice dropping into that patronizing octave people use for toddlers and idiots. "You are just tired. It has been a long week. You are confused." I looked up at her. I squinted. "Nurse," I asked. Vanessa recoiled as if I had slapped her. "Excuse me, did the agency send you?" I asked, reaching out a shaking hand to touch the fabric of her silk blouse. "You are not wearing your uniform. Beatrice said the night nurse was coming." "Did you bring my heart pills?" Vanessa looked at Broderick. Her face went through a complex gymnastics routine, offense, confusion, and finally a cold, predatory realization. She smiled. It was the ugliest smile I had ever seen. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood. I am the nurse. I am here to take care of you." She looked at Broderick and winked. It was a subtle movement, a quick flutter of the eyelid, but I saw it. It was the signal. He is gone. We own him. Broderick let out a breath he must have been holding since he arrived. Okay, this works. Dad, the nurse wants us to go to the bank, to secure the assets. For Mom. For Mom, I repeated dully. Yes. For Beatrice. We have to pay the gardener. Exactly, Broderick said. We have to pay the gardener. So where are the keys? Patted my robe pockets. I don't know, I think the other nurse took them. Broderick groaned. He ran a hand through his hair. We don't have time for this. Vanessa, help him look. While Broderick tore apart the drawers in the hallway console, Vanessa stayed in the kitchen. You seem agitated, Conrad, she said. You are shaking. I am cold. I lied. It is so cold in here. I will make you some tea, she said. A nice hot cup of tea. It will calm your nerves before we go. I watched her go to the stove. I watched her fill the kettle. and then I watched her reach into her purse. She was standing with her back to me, blocking my view with her body. But the stainless steel of the microwave above the stove acted as a perfect mirror. I saw her pull out a small blister pack. It wasn't tea. It wasn't sugar. It was a white pill. She crushed it between 2 spoons, grinding it into a fine powder. She did it efficiently, practiced. She put a tea bag in my favorite mug, the one that said "World's Best Dad," a gift from Broderick 20 years ago, when he still had a soul. She poured the hot water. Then she tapped the powder into the steaming liquid. She stirred it vigorously. She turned around. The smile was back, plastered on like a mask. "Here we go," she said, placing the mug in front of me. "Drink up. It is a special blend. Chamomile and valerian. It will stop the shaking." I looked at the dark liquid. Steam curled off the surface, carrying a faint chemical acridity beneath the floral scent of the tea. If I drank this, I would be pliable. I would be groggy. I might sign the deed without even knowing I was holding a pen. Or worse, if the dosage was wrong and Vanessa was no chemist, it could interact with my blood pressure medication. It could stop my heart. Maybe that was the point. An overdose for the grieving widower. A tragic accident. "Drink," Vanessa urged. "We can't leave until you finish it." Broderick came back into the kitchen. "I couldn't find the keys," he snapped. "Dad, think." "Where are they?" I stared at the mug. My hands were shaking for real now. The survival instinct was screaming at me to throw the scalding liquid in her face. "I can't drink it hot," I whined. "It burns my tongue." "Just blow on it, old man," Broderick muttered. I lifted the mug. My hands trembled so violently that liquid sloshed over the rim, burning my fingers. I yelped and dropped the mug back onto the table with a clatter. "Look what you made me do," I cried, my voice rising in a childish wail. "I made a mess. Beatrice will be so angry." I stood up, knocking my chair over. It was a commotion. It was noise. It was distraction. "Oh my God." Vanessa sighed. She grabbed a towel. "Sit down, Conrad. Just sit down." I didn't sit. I shuffled away from the table, clutching the mug against my chest, like a prized possession I was protecting. "I will drink it by the window," I said. "I want to see the birds. Beatrice feeds the birds." I walked toward the bay window in the living room. There was a large potted fern there, a Boston fern that Beatrice had nurtured for a decade. It was lush and green, sitting in a heavy ceramic pot filled with dark, absorbent soil. Broderick and Vanessa were busy wiping the table. They weren't looking at me. They thought I was just a confused old man wandering toward the sunlight. I reached the window. I turned my back to the kitchen. I brought the mug to my lips, pretending to sip. Then, with a quick tilt of my wrist, I poured the entire contents into the center of the fern. The soil drank it greedily. The steam rose up through the fronds, disappearing into the sunlight. I stood there for a moment, holding the empty mug. I took a deep breath, steadying my heart rate. I turned back to them. I wiped my mouth with my sleeve. "Good tea," I said. "I feel sleepy." Vanessa looked up. Her eyes glittered. "Good. That means it is working." She checked her watch. It had been 3 minutes. She thought the drugs were hitting my bloodstream. She thought she had won. "Okay," Broderick said. He grabbed my arm. "Let's go. We will find the keys later. We can get the locksmith to drill the box if we have to. The manager knows me." He didn't know the manager. The manager had retired 2 years ago. But Broderick lived in a world where he believed his own lies. They led me out to the car. I stumbled on the steps, leaning heavily on Broderick. He supported my weight with a grunt of annoyance. "You are heavy, Dad. Lose some weight." I let them buckle me into the back seat of their rental car. I leaned my head against the cool glass. I closed my eyes. I wasn't sleepy. I was wide awake. I was sharper than I had ever been. We spent 3 hours at the bank. It was a farce. I pretended to forget my social security number. I pretended to lose my ID in the car, forcing Broderick to search under the seats for 20 minutes, while I sat in the lobby drinking free water. When we finally got to the deposit box, using the spare key I had, miraculously, found in my wallet, it was empty. I had moved everything 2 days ago. Broderick's scream in the bank vault was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. "Someone robbed us," he yelled. I just stood there looking at the empty metal box. "Maybe the government took it," I whispered. "For taxes." We left the bank with nothing. Broderick was shaking with rage. Vanessa was silent, calculating. When we got back to the house, it was late afternoon. I went straight to my room, claiming I needed a nap. I locked the door. The next morning, I woke up early. The house was quiet. I walked downstairs to the living room. I went to the bay window. The Boston fern, the one that had been lush and green 24 hours ago, was dead. It wasn't just wilted. It was destroyed. The fronds were brown and crispy as if they had been torched with a flamethrower. The stems were black. The chemical cocktail Vanessa had brewed, whatever combination of sedatives, painkillers, or cleaners she had crushed into that powder, was toxic enough to kill a hardy plant in a single night. I stared at the dead leaves. If I had drunk that tea, that would be my liver. That would be my kidneys. That would be my heart. They weren't trying to sedate me. They weren't trying to calm me down. They were trying to liquidate me. I heard footsteps on the stairs. I quickly moved away from the plant, standing in front of it to block the view. Broderick came down. He looked worse than yesterday. Desperation was eating him alive. "Dad," he said, "get dressed." I called a doctor. "A doctor?" I asked. "Yes," Broderick said. "Dr. Morris. He is a specialist. He is coming to the house to evaluate you. Since you can't remember where the money is, we need to get you help." Help meant guardianship. Help meant a signature from a crooked doctor declaring me unfit. Help meant they were moving to the endgame. I looked at my son. I looked at the dead plant behind me. "Okay," I said. "I will get dressed." I walked past him. I didn't look at his face. I was looking at his neck, wondering if he would feel the noose tightening yet. Because Dr. Morris wasn't just walking into a house. He was walking into a federal investigation, and my son was opening the door. I lay on the sofa in the living room, my body draped in a heavy wool blanket that smelled of mothballs and thyme. I kept my breathing shallow and rhythmic, a steady rasp that mimicked the deep sleep of the elderly. My eyes were closed, but my ears were straining against the silence, tuning out the hum of the refrigerator and the wind against the siding to focus on the voices in the kitchen. Broderick and Vanessa were arguing. Again. They thought I was out cold. They thought the stress of the bank visit and the confusion I had displayed earlier had finally knocked me out. They didn't know I was running on a cocktail of adrenaline and pure distilled hatred. They walked into the living room. I felt the vibration of Broderick's heavy steps through the floorboards. He stopped near the fireplace. I heard the clink of glass against glass. He was pouring himself a drink from my crystal decanter. Bourbon. My 20-year-old Pappy Van Winkle. He was drinking it like it was mouthwash. "He is out," Vanessa whispered. Her voice was close. She must have been standing right over me. I resisted the urge to flinch. I kept my mouth slightly open, letting a small, pathetic snore escape. "Good," Broderick muttered. "I can't look at him right now. He is useless. A useless, senile old man." "He is not useless," Vanessa corrected him. "He is an asset. A liquidatable asset. But we have to move fast, Broderick. The bank was a disaster today. If we don't get power of attorney tomorrow, we are finished." I heard Broderick gulp down the whiskey, then the sound of the glass slamming onto the mantelpiece. "You don't understand the pressure, Ness," he hissed. "I got a call today. From the guys in Vegas. They aren't asking nicely anymore. Who? Vanessa asked. Mikhail Broderick said. The debt isn't 300 anymore. With the interest, the vigorish, it is $450,000. 450,000. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had to force myself to keep breathing slowly. Nearly $500,000. My son hadn't just made a few bad bets. He had gambled away a lifetime of earnings. He was deep in the underworld owing money to people who didn't send collection letters. 450, Vanessa's voice was sharp but not surprised. She knew. She had known all along. Okay, we can cover that. The house appraised for $1.2 million last year on Zillow. If we list it for a quick cash sale at $1 million flat, we will have a bidding war by Friday. And Dad? Broderick asked. What about him? Where do we put him? We can't sell the house with him sitting on the sofa, drooling. Vanessa laughed. It was a low, throaty sound. Shady Pines, baby. Shady Pines. Broderick sounded doubtful. Isn't that the state-run place off the highway? The one that got shut down for health code violations last year. It reopened, Vanessa said. It is cheap. It is Medicaid funded. We drop him off, sign the admission papers with the power of attorney, doctor. Morris is going to give us tomorrow, and we forget about him. He won't know the difference. He thinks I am a nurse, Broderick. He is gone. His brain is mush. He will sit in a chair looking at a wall until he expires, and we will be living in Paris. Paris. So that was the plan. Dump the father who raised him in a warehouse for the dying, sell the family home for quick cash, pay off the mob, and flee to Europe. It was efficient. It was brutal. It was exactly what I expected. But then the conversation shifted. I am going to go have a smoke on the porch, Broderick said. I need to clear my head. This Morris guy, he is solid, right? He won't flake. He is expensive, Vanessa said. That is why he is solid. $5,000 cash. You have it, I pawned the Rolex, Broderick said. The one Mom gave me for graduation. I got $6 for it. He sold his graduation watch. Beatrice had saved for 3 years to buy that watch. Just get it done, Vanessa said. Go smoke. You stink of fear. I heard the front door open and close. Broderick was outside. I was alone with Vanessa. I waited for her to leave the room. I waited for her to go upstairs, but she didn't move. I heard the tap, tap, tap of a screen. She was texting. Then she made a call. Hey, baby, she whispered. Her voice had changed completely. It wasn't the shrewish tone she used with Broderick. It was sultry, dangerous. I listened, my blood turning to ice. Yeah, he is outside, she said. The idiot is falling apart. He told me the debt is $450. Yeah, I know. It is fine. Listen, Rico. The house is worth $1 million easy. We get the power of attorney tomorrow. We sell by next week. Rico, not a bank manager, not a lawyer, a lover. Here is the plan, she continued, pacing the room. Her heels clicked near my head. Once the cash hits the joint account, I am transferring half to the Cayman Shell company we set up. $500,000. That is our ticket. She paused, listening. No, she laughed. Broderick won't see a dime of that. He can use his half to pay off the Russians if he wants. Or they can break his legs. I don't care. I am done with him. He is a loser, Rico. Just like his parents. I am taking the money and I am meeting you in Tulum. Book the villa. The big one. She hung up. I lay there, the silence rushing back into the room. The betrayal was geometric. It was a fractal of deceit. Broderick was betraying me to pay his debts. Vanessa was betraying Broderick to steal the profit. They were a nest of vipers eating each other's tails. She was going to leave him. She was going to let him sell his childhood home, dump his father in a hellhole, and then she was going to steal his share of the blood money and leave him to be murdered by loan sharks. It was almost poetic. If it didn't involve my life as collateral damage, I might have applauded her ruthlessness. She walked out of the room, humming a little tune. I heard her go into the kitchen. I heard the fridge open. She was getting a snack. I opened my eyes. The ceiling was shadowed, the plaster molding looking like gray bones in the dim light. I had heard enough. I had the numbers. $450,000 in debt. $1.2 million in equity. A $5,000 bribe for a corrupt doctor. And a plane ticket to Tulum funded by my misery. I sat up slowly. My joints cracked. I looked at the empty glass of bourbon Broderick had left on the mantel. They thought I was the victim. They thought I was the sheep waiting for the slaughter. But they had forgotten one thing. I was the architect. I knew how to build things, and I knew exactly where to place the dynamite to bring the whole structure down on their heads. I reached into the cushions of the sofa and pulled out the small digital recorder I had hidden there an hour ago. I pressed the stop button. The tiny red light winked out. I had it all. The confession, the conspiracy, the fraud. I put the recorder in my pocket. I lay back down. I pulled the blanket up to my chin. Tomorrow Dr. Morris was coming. Tomorrow they would try to sign my life away. I closed my eyes. I wasn't pretending to sleep anymore. I was resting. Because tomorrow I had a performance to give, and I wanted to be fresh for the standing ovation. 3 a.m. is the hour of ghosts and guilty consciences. The house was a mausoleum of silence broken only by the rhythmic, heavy breathing of the people upstairs who were dreaming of my demise. I moved through the hallway like a shadow stepping over the floorboard that always creaked, a trick I had learned avoiding, waking a teething Broderick 40 years ago. Now I was using it to avoid the man who wanted to put me in a cage. I slipped out the back door. The night air was biting a sharp Chicago wind that cut through my coat, but it felt clean. It felt honest. I didn't take the truck. The engine was too loud. The rumble would wake the neighbors, or worse, Vanessa, who slept with one eye open like a shark. I walked 3 blocks to the all-night diner on 5th Street, a place called the Rusty Spoon, where the neon sign flickered with a persistent buzzing twitch. Wallace was already there. He sat in a corner booth looking ridiculously out of place in his charcoal wool suit amidst the cracked vinyl seats and the smell of burnt bacon grease. He had a briefcase on the table and a cup of black coffee that he hadn't touched. I slid into the booth opposite him. He didn't say hello. He just pushed a heavy stack of documents toward me. "You look like hell, Conrad," he said. "I feel like a man who just woke up from a coma," I replied. "Do you have it?" Wallace tapped the papers. "The Beatrice Blackwood Irrevocable Charitable Trust. Once you sign this, Conrad, it is done. The money leaves your control. It leaves my control. It goes into a lockbox that only the board of directors can open, and you are not on the board." I looked at the document. It was thick, dense, with legalese, the language of finality. $8,240,000, I said. "Plus the liquid assets from the offshore accounts," Wallace added. "And the portfolio." I picked up the pen. It was a heavy Mont Blanc, a gift from Beatrice on my 50th birthday. It felt right to use it for this. I flipped to the signature page. I didn't hesitate. I signed my name with a flourish, the ink dark and permanent. "Done," I said. Wallace took the paper. He stamped it with a notary seal he had brought with him. The sound of the stamp hitting the table was loud, like a gavel coming down. "Who are the beneficiaries?" Wallace asked softly, though he already knew. "The National Stroke Association," I said, "and the Shadowy Hills Animal Sanctuary." Beatrice loved dogs. She loved them more than she loved the people who let her die. Wallace nodded. He slid the next document across the table. This one was thinner but infinitely more dangerous. The quitclaim deed. This transfers the title of 42 Oakwood Drive to Phoenix Holdings, LLC, Wallace explained. A shell company registered in Delaware 5 hours ago. I am the registered agent. You are the silent president. And the purchase price I asked. $10, Wallace said. $10. My home. The place where I carried Beatrice over the threshold. The place where I taught Broderick to ride a bike. The place where I built the deck with my own hands. Sold for the price of a diner breakfast. I signed it. The moment the ink dried, I felt a strange sensation. Weightlessness. Technically, Wallace said, gathering the papers and sliding them into his briefcase, you are now a homeless man, Conrad. You have 0 assets. You have 0 income. Your bank accounts are empty. If you died right now, your estate would be worth the lint in your pocket. Perfect, I said. And Broderick, Wallace asked. When he tries to pull the title search tomorrow, I smiled. It was a cold, hard expression that felt like granite. When he pulls the title, he will see that the house he promised to the mob doesn't belong to him. It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to a corporation that doesn't exist on any map he can find. And the debt is his, I said. The house was his collateral. Without the house, he is just a man who owes $500,000 to people who don't accept excuses. Wallace snapped the briefcase shut. He looked at me with a mixture of admiration and fear. You know, Conrad, he said, most clients who do this, they are protecting their assets from the government or from lawsuits. You are the first one I have ever seen do it to protect himself from his own blood. My blood is on the hands of the woman sleeping in my guest room, I said. I am just scrubbing the stain out. I stood up. The waitress, a tired woman with circles under her eyes, came over to refill the coffee I hadn't drunk. Can I get you anything else, Han? She asked. No, I said. I have everything I need. I walked out of the diner. The sky was beginning to turn a bruised purple in the east. Dawn was coming. The day of the doctor. The day of the diagnosis. I walked back to the house. I let myself in the back door. I crept back into the living room and lay down on the sofa. I pulled the blanket up to my chin. I checked my watch. 4:45 a.m. In 4 hours, Dr. Morris would walk through that door with his fake clipboard and his rehearsed questions. He would look at me and see a confused, senile old man. He would sign a paper declaring me incompetent. He would hand that paper to my son, and my son would think he had been handed the keys to the kingdom. But he wouldn't know that the kingdom was already burned to the ground. I closed my eyes. I imagined the look on Broderick's face when the bank told him the account balance was 0. I imagined Vanessa's scream when the real estate agent told her the house had been sold for $10. I slept. For the first time in 4 days, I slept soundly. I slept like a baby. I slept like a man who owned nothing and therefore had nothing left to lose. At 9 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. It wasn't the hesitant chime of a neighbor bringing a casserole. It was a sharp, authoritative double buzz. Broderick practically sprinted to the door on his movements jerky and caffeinated. I stayed in the armchair, my hands resting on my knees, arranging my face into a mask of benign vacuity. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I stared at a dust mote floating in a sunbeam. I was ready. Dr. Morris walked in. He didn't look like a healer. He looked like a hedge fund manager who happened to own a stethoscope. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, and his shoes were polished to a mirror shine that seemed out of place on my worn entryway rug. He carried a leather portfolio, not a medical bag. There was no warmth in his eyes, only a flat transactional assessment as he scanned the room, and then landed on me. Mr. Blackwood Broderick said, his voice trembling with a fake cheerfulness that made my teeth ache. This is Dr. Morris. He is a specialist. He is just here to have a little chat with you, to make sure you are doing okay. I looked at the stranger. I blinked slowly, owl-like. "Is he the plumber?" I asked. My voice was raspy. "The upstairs toilet is leaking again. Beatrice told you to fix it." Broderick exchanged a look with Vanessa. She was standing by the fireplace, her arms crossed, watching the scene with the cold detachment of a scientist observing a lab rat. She smirked. "No, Dad," Broderick said, suppressing a smile. "He is a doctor." "Doctor—" Morris pulled a chair over and sat directly in front of me. He smelled of peppermint and antiseptic, a scent designed to mask the rot of his profession. He didn't check my pulse. He didn't listen to my heart. He didn't look at my pupils. He opened his portfolio and uncapped a heavy fountain pen. "Good morning, Conrad," he said. "Can you tell me your full name?" I paused. I let my eyes wander to the window. I furrowed my brow as if the question required immense cognitive effort. "Conrad. William." "Blackwood," I muttered. "Good," Morris said. He didn't write it down. He just tapped the paper. "And do you know who these people are?" He pointed the pen at Broderick and Vanessa. I looked at my son. I looked at the man who had kicked my dog, forged my wife's signature, and planned to dump me in a state-run facility. That is the boy," I said. "He mows the lawn. He does a bad job. He always misses the edges." Broderick's face flushed red. I knew that stung. He prided himself on being a big shot, a businessman. Being reduced to the neighborhood lawn boy was a blow to his fragile ego. And Morris pointed to Vanessa. "The nurse," I said confidently. "She brings the tea. The bitter tea." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "See," she said to the doctor. "He is completely gone. He thinks I am the help. He doesn't even recognize his own son." Morris nodded. He made a tick mark on his paper. "Just a few more questions, Conrad. Can you tell me where you are right now?" I looked around the room. This was my home. The home I had built. But to sell the lie, I had to be lost. "We are at the station," I whispered, "waiting for the train." Morris made another tick mark. "And finally, Conrad, can you tell me what year it is?" This was the clincher. This was the question that determined whether a person was oriented to time and place. If I answered 2024, I was sane. If I answered anything else, I was a liability. I looked Morris in the eye. I let a tear leak out of the corner of my eye. I made my voice tremble with a heartbreaking sincerity. "It is 1975, I said. Gerald Ford is president, and I have to hurry. Beatrice is pregnant. She is having the baby today. I have to get to the hospital." The room went silent. 1975 was the year Broderick was born. It was the year my life changed. It was the year I promised to protect that boy with my life. And now I was using that memory to seal his fate. Morris closed the portfolio. He stood up. He didn't look at me again. He looked at Broderick. "It is textbook," Morris said. "Advanced vascular dementia with retrograde amnesia. He is disoriented, delusional, and completely detached from the present reality. He is a danger to himself. He cannot manage his own affairs. He cannot manage his hygiene. He certainly cannot manage an estate." Broderick let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. It sounded like relief. "So you will sign it?" Broderick asked. Morris pulled a document from the folder. "Certificate of incapacity." "I need the fee," Morris said softly. Broderick reached into his pocket. He pulled out a thick white envelope. It was bulging. $5,000 in cash. Money he had gotten from pawning his watch and stealing from my wallet while I slept. He handed it to the doctor. Morris didn't count it. He slipped it into his jacket pocket with a practiced smoothness. Then he signed the paper. The scratching of the nib against the paper sounded like a key turning in a lock. "Thank you," Dr. Vanessa said. She was beaming. She looked like a cat that had just swallowed a canary. "You need to file this with the court immediately," Morris advised. "With this certificate, the emergency conservatorship will be granted ex parte. You will have full control by this afternoon. You can freeze his accounts, sell the assets, and admit him to a facility." I sat there watching them discuss the dismantling of my life. They were talking about me as if I were a piece of furniture to be put into storage. Morris left without saying goodbye to me. The door closed. Broderick held the paper in his hands. He stared at it. He looked like a man who had just found a winning lottery ticket in the gutter. "We did it," he whispered. "Ness, we did it." Vanessa walked over to him. She kissed him on the cheek. It wasn't a kiss of affection. It was a kiss of ownership. "Sign the application." "Broderick," she said. "Right now. Upload it to the court portal." Broderick went to the dining room table. He spread out the papers. The application for conservatorship. The petition that would strip me of my rights, my voice, and my dignity. He picked up a pen. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look at me sitting in the armchair, lost in 1975. He didn't think about the baseball games, the graduation ceremonies, the times I had bailed him out. He signed his name, Broderick Blackwood, conservator. Then he pulled out his phone. He took a picture of the document. He tapped the screen furiously. "Sent," he said. "It is filed." He turned to me. The mask of the concerned son dropped completely. His face twisted into a sneer of pure, unadulterated triumph. He walked over to me. He leaned down, his face inches from mine. He smelled of sweat and victory. "Hey, Dad," he said loudly. "Can you hear me in 1975? I blinked at him. "You are retired, Dad," he laughed. "You are officially retired. And guess what? I am the boss now. I own the house. I own the money. I own you." Vanessa laughed from the doorway. "Don't be mean, baby. He doesn't understand." "Oh, he understands enough," Broderick said. He stood up and stretched, his joints popping. He looked at the room. He looked at the antique clock. He looked at the paintings. "We list the house on Monday," he said. 1 million quick sale. I'll call the realtor now." "And Conrad?" Vanessa asked. Broderick looked at me with cold, dead eyes. "Call Shady Pines," he said. "Tell them we are bringing a new admission tomorrow morning. Tell them he is aggressive. Tell them to have the sedatives ready." He turned his back on me. He walked into the kitchen, already dialing his phone, likely calling the mobster Mikhail to tell him the money was coming. I sat in the chair. I watched them celebrate. I listened to them divide the spoils of a war they didn't know they had already lost. Broderick had just signed a legal document taking custody of an estate that was worth $0. He had just made himself legally responsible for a man who had no assets to seize. He had just sworn to a court that he was in charge of a ghost ship. And by filing that document, by attaching Dr. Morris's fraudulent certificate, he had just committed federal mail and wire fraud. I closed my eyes. I let a small, drooling smile play on my lips. "Enjoy the victory lap, son," I thought, "because you just ran straight off a cliff." The door had barely clicked shut behind Dr. Morris before the atmosphere in the room shifted from performative concern to predatory celebration. Broderick was holding the signed medical certificate like it was a winning lottery ticket, his hands shaking, not with grief, but with the adrenaline of a gambler who just hit the jackpot. He scanned the document, his eyes darting over the words incapacitated and dementia with a greedy hunger that made my stomach turn. To him, those words weren't a tragedy. They were the combination to the safe. Vanessa didn't waste a single second on sentimentality. She didn't look at me with pity or even relief. She looked at me the way a butcher looks at a carcass, assessing the cuts, calculating the weight, already counting the profit. She pulled her phone from her pocket, her long acrylic nails clicking rhythmically against the screen. She didn't leave the room. She didn't lower her voice. She stood right in the center of my living room, claiming the space as her own. Air France, she said into the phone, putting it on speaker so she could simultaneously browse on her tablet. Yes, I need 2 tickets for tomorrow night. O'Hare to Charles de Gaulle. First class. No, not business. First. The lay-flat seats. She looked at Broderick and smirked. We deserve the legroom, babe. It has been a stressful week. I sat in my wingback chair, my hands folded in my lap, staring blankly at the fireplace. I kept my mouth slightly open, maintaining the ruse, but inside I was memorizing every word. They were booking flights with money that didn't exist on credit cards, that were about to be declined to a country they would never reach. Broderick poured himself another drink. He was celebrating his victory over a senile old man. We are going to Paris, he muttered to himself, raising the glass to the ceiling. We are finally free. Vanessa held up a hand to silence him. She was on another call. This time her tone was sharp, professional, the voice of a woman who believes she is the CEO of the world. Hi, is this Sarah? Yes, this is Vanessa Blackwood. We are ready to list 42 Oakwood. Yes, today. We have the conservatorship papers. The owner is indisposed. We need a market analysis and measurements immediately. Can you be here in an hour? Great. Bring the contract. We want to list at 1.1 million for a cash close. She hung up and turned to Broderick. Sarah is coming. We need to declutter. This place smells like old people and failure. She started moving through the room, grabbing Beatrice's porcelain figurines from the mantelpieces my wife had collected for 40 years and tossing them into a cardboard box she had dragged in from the garage. She didn't wrap them. She just threw them. I heard the sickening crunch of delicate china shattering against itself. Every crack was a blow to my heart, but I didn't flinch. I couldn't. To react now would be to lose the war. Broderick watched her, useless as always. What about him? He asked, pointing his glass at me. We can't have him sitting there drooling when the realtor comes. It kills the vibe. Vanessa stopped. She looked at me. She walked over until she was standing directly in front of my chair. She waved a hand in front of my face. I didn't blink. I stared past her, focusing on a spot of peeling paint on the wall. He is furniture, Broderick, she said. Just ignore him. Or better yet, drape a sheet over him. She laughed at her own joke. It was a cruel, sharp sound. Actually, she continued, tapping her chin. We need to accelerate the timeline. I don't want to deal with the admission paperwork tomorrow morning. It cuts too close to our flight. She pulled out her phone again. She dialed a number. I knew who she was calling before she even spoke. Shady Pines. Yes, this is Vanessa Blackwood. We spoke earlier about the admission for Conrad Blackwood. Yes, the dementia case. We are going to bring him in early, tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. Yes, I know visiting hours don't start until 9. We aren't visiting. We are dropping him off. She paused, listening to the person on the other end. Yes, he is aggressive, she lied smoothly. He gets violent if he isn't sedated. Have the orderlies ready at the loading dock. We will just hand him over. And make sure you have the isolation room prepped. We don't want him wandering off before the check clears. She hung up. She looked at Broderick. Done, she said. We ship the old man off at dawn. Then we sign the listing agreement, grab the suitcases, and head to the airport. By the time he realizes he is in a cell, we will be drinking wine over the Atlantic. Broderick grinned. He walked over and kissed her. It was a celebration of their own rot. An hour later, the realtor arrived. Sarah was a petite woman with a laser tape measure and a shark's smile. She didn't introduce herself to me. She didn't even acknowledge my presence. Vanessa had clearly briefed her that the owner was non compos mentis. They moved through the house like a demolition crew. Sarah held the laser device against the walls, the little red dot dancing across the family photos, across the furniture, across my chest. Dining room is 14 by 12, Sarah announced. Good size. We should stage it. Get rid of this heavy table. It is dated. That table was mahogany. I had built it myself for our 10th anniversary. Beatrice and I had sanded it by hand. Dump it, Vanessa said. We are selling it furnished or trashing it. Whatever is faster. They walked into the living room where I was sitting. Sarah stopped. She looked at me, then at Vanessa. Is he staying? Sarah asked, lowering her voice slightly. He is leaving tomorrow, Vanessa said loudly. Just work around him. Sarah nodded. She stepped over my legs to measure the window. Her skirt brushed against my knee. She didn't apologize. To them, I was just an obstacle, a bulky armchair that hadn't been moved yet. Living room is 20 by 18, Sarah said. Great light. If we tear out these built-ins and paint everything white, it will look modern. Buyers hate this dark wood. Paint it white. Paint over the black walnut paneling I had installed in 1990. Paint over the history. Whitewash the life Beatrice and I had built until it looked like every other soulless flip on the market. Broderick was standing by the window looking out at the garden. He wasn't seeing the hydrangeas Beatrice had planted. He was seeing dollar signs. How fast can we close? He asked. If we price it right, Sarah said. Cash offers in 48 hours. Close in 10 days. 10 days, Broderick whispered. He looked like he was about to cry with relief. 10 days, and the Russians are off my back. They finished measuring. They stood in the foyer shaking hands, laughing about the market, making plans to carve up my carcass. I sat in the chair feeling the hum of the house around me. They thought they were measuring square footage. They thought they were calculating equity. But they were wrong. They were measuring the blast radius. Vanessa walked Sarah to the door. Perfect, she said. Send the contract over tonight. We will sign it digitally. And Sarah, don't worry about the old man. By the time you start showings, this place will be empty. She closed the door. She turned to Broderick. We did it, she said. We actually pulled it off. Broderick looked at me one last time. He didn't look like a son. He looked like a stranger. Yeah, he said. We did. He turned off the lights in the living room, leaving me sitting in the dark. Get some rest, Dad, he called out, his voice dripping with mockery. Big day tomorrow. You are going on a trip. He laughed as he went upstairs. I sat in the darkness listening to them move around above my head. I wasn't tired. I wasn't confused. I was waiting, because he was right. It was a big day tomorrow. But the only trip happening was the one they were taking straight to hell, and I had already booked their tickets. The music was a physical assault, a bass-heavy thumping that rattled the window panes and vibrated through the rubber wheels of my chair. It was 7:30 in the evening, and my living room, the room where Beatrice and I had read books in companionable silence for 40 years, had been transformed into a chaotic, sweaty nightclub. The air was thick with the smell of marijuana smoke, expensive perfume, and the distinct copper tang of spilled alcohol. They called it a housewarming, a pre-departure bash. 50 strangers crowded into the space, grinding their heels into the oriental rugs Beatrice had brushed by hand. They were Broderick's network, a collection of sycophants, hangers-on, and people who mistook debt for wealth. They didn't know me. They didn't know Beatrice. They barely knew Broderick, but they knew there was an open bar, and that was enough. I sat in the corner, wedged between a bookshelf and a potted ficus that someone had already used as an ashtray. Broderick had wheeled me there an hour ago, draping a tartan blanket over my lap to complete the tableau of the invalid father. Just ignore him, I heard him tell a woman with glitter on her eyelids. He likes the noise. It helps with the cognitive decline. I stared straight ahead, my face a mask of slack-jawed vacuity, but my eyes were sharp. I was recording every face. I was cataloging every sin. Broderick was holding court by the fireplace. He was wearing a velvet blazer that he had likely charged to one of the fraudulent cards this morning. He looked manic, his movements too fast, his laughter too loud. He was high on adrenaline and the false promise of $1 million payday. "To the moon," he shouted, raising a bottle. "We are selling this place next week. Cash buyer. Then it is au revoir, Chicago. Hello, Paris." The crowd cheered. Vanessa was dancing on the coffee table, her heels digging gouges into the wood. I had stained myself. She was drinking champagne straight from the bottle, spilling foam down the front of her dress. She looked triumphant. She looked untouchable. Then Broderick did the unthinkable. He ran to the basement door. "Wait," he yelled over the music. "We need the good stuff. The old man has a cellar full of dust collectors. Let's breathe some air into them." He disappeared downstairs. My stomach clenched. He came back up carrying armfuls of bottles. My 1982 Bordeaux, the vintage port from our wedding year. Bottles I had saved for decades, waiting for a milestone worthy of their opening. He didn't use a corkscrew. He smashed the neck of the first bottle against the brick of the fireplace. Glass shattered. Wine exploded onto the hearth. "Drink up!" he screamed, passing the jagged, broken bottle to a man in a leather jacket. "It is all free. It is all ours." They passed the bottles around like cheap beer. They chugged wine that was meant to be sipped. They sprayed it at each other. A stream of dark red liquid hit the wall where Beatrice's portrait used to hang, before Vanessa threw it in the trash yesterday. It dripped down the wallpaper like a wound. "It tastes like vinegar," someone shouted, laughing. "Who cares?" Broderick yelled back. "It costs $500 a bottle. Pour it on the floor. We can buy more." He upended a bottle of Barolo and poured it deliberately onto the carpet, drawing a circle around Vanessa's feet as she danced. She squealed in delight, kicking up pink wine-stained froth. I felt a tear leak from my eye, not of sadness, of pure distilled rage. That wine was a memory of a trip Beatrice and I took to Italy. It was sunlight and soil and time, and he was using it to mop the floor. I looked at the grandfather clock in the hall. It was the only thing they hadn't touched, perhaps because it was too heavy to move. The hands stood at 7:58. 2 minutes. I had texted Wallace at 7:30. Green light. I had written, "Send the cavalry." I shifted in the chair. I checked the pocket of my cardigan. The remote for the sound system was there. The folder with the documents was tucked between my hip and the side of the chair. Broderick stumbled over to me. He was sweating profusely. He leaned down, his face a mask of drunken cruelty. "Hey, Dad," he shouted over the bass. "You thirsty? Want a sip of your retirement fund?" He tried to pour wine into my mouth. I kept my lips sealed. The wine splashed over my face, staining my white shirt red. He laughed. "Look at him. He is a mess. Don't worry, old man. Tomorrow you get a sponge bath at Shady Pines. They love messes there." He patted my cheek hard. "Enjoy the party. It is your last night in civilization." He turned back to his guests. "Who wants to see the master suite?" he bellowed. "We are going to trash it." I looked at the clock. The second hand swept past the 12. 7:59. I wiped the wine from my eyes. I took a deep breath. The time for acting was over. The time for the old man to die and the architect to return had arrived. I reached into my pocket and gripped the remote. My thumb hovered over the power button. The clock began to chime. 1, 2, 3. At the 8th chime, I pressed the button. The music cut out instantly. The silence that followed was more violent than the noise. The shouting died down. 50 heads turned confused, looking for the source of the interruption. Broderick turned around, angry. "Who killed the music, Vanessa? Did you hit the—" He stopped. I was standing up, I had kicked the blanket away. I was standing tall, my spine straight, my eyes clear and cold as a winter morning. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't drooling. I was walking toward the center of the room, stepping over the wine puddles with deliberate precision. "The party is over," I said. My voice wasn't a whisper. It was a command. Broderick's jaw dropped. "Dad." "What? What are you doing?" I walked past him. I walked to the stereo system and ripped the power cord out of the wall, sparking a small flash of blue light. I turned to face the room. "Get out," I said to the guests. "All of you, now." "Who is this guy?" someone shouted. "I am the man who owns this house," I said. "And the police are 2 minutes away." Broderick stepped forward, his face twisting from confusion to aggression. "Sit down, Dad. You are having an episode. Someone grab him." "Don't touch me," I snapped. The authority in my voice froze him in his tracks. I reached into the chair and pulled out the thick manila envelope I had hidden there. I threw it onto the wine-stained coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud. "You wanted the paperwork, Broderick?" I said. "Here it is. Happy birthday." The grandfather clock in the hallway struck the first note of 8 o'clock. It was a deep, resonant chime that I could feel in my chest, a vibration that synced with the pounding of my own heart. It was the bell tolling for the end of the masquerade. For 4 days I had hunched my shoulders. I had shuffled my feet. I had slurred my speech and let my hands tremble until my own muscles ached from the tension of holding the pose. I had played the role of the victim, the Mark the senile old fool ripe for the picking. But as the clock chimed, I let it all go. I pushed the heavy wool blanket off my lap. It slid to the floor, a heap of tartan fabric that had been my shield. I placed my hands on the armrests of the wheelchair. I didn't push up weakly. I didn't struggle. I engaged my core, the same core that had climbed scaffolding and walked steel beams for 40 years, and I stood up. I rose to my full height, 6 feet and 1 inch. My spine straightened, the vertebrae stacking one on top of the other, locking into a posture of absolute unyielding command. The pain in my knees, the stiffness in my back, it all evaporated under the heat of the adrenaline flooding my system. I took a step forward, then another. The party was still raging around me. The bass was thumping so hard, the floorboards were jumping. A woman in a silver dress, holding a bottle of my vintage Cabernet like a beer, bumped into me. She spun around, ready to snap an insult at the cripple, but the words died in her throat when she looked up and saw me towering over her. She stumbled back, her eyes wide as if she had seen a corpse rise from the grave. I didn't look at her. I didn't look at anyone. My eyes were locked on the stereo system in the corner, the black monolith that was pumping this filth into the sanctuary I had built with Beatrice. I walked through the crowd. It was like parting the Red Sea. People stopped dancing. They stopped drinking. They sensed the shift in the room's energy before they even understood what was happening. It was the primal instinct of a herd sensing a predator in their midst. I reached the stereo. I didn't bother finding the volume knob. I didn't look for the power button. I reached behind the cabinet, grabbed the thick power cord in my fist, and yanked it out of the wall with a savage jerk. Sparks showered down. The music died instantly. The silence that followed was violent. It crashed into the room, sucking the air out of the lungs of 50 people. The laughter cut off. The shouting ceased. The only sound was the heavy, ragged breathing of the revelers and the steady, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Broderick was standing by the fireplace, a glass of wine halfway to his mouth. He froze. He turned his head slowly, his eyes searching for the source of the interruption, annoyance already curling his lip. "Who killed the music?" he shouted, his voice slurring slightly. "Vanessa, did you hit the—" He stopped. He saw me. He saw his father, the man he thought was a vegetable, standing in the center of the room like a statue carved from granite. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't drooling. My face was set in a mask of cold, hard fury. The glass slipped from his fingers. It hit the hearth and shattered, spraying red wine over his expensive loafers. "Dad," he whispered. Then the shock turned to panic. He took a step forward, his hands coming up in a placating gesture that looked pathetic. "Dad, what? What the hell are you doing?" "Sit down. You are having an episode." He looked around at his guests, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Someone help him. He is confused. He thinks he is... He doesn't know where he is. He tried to rush me. He tried to put his hands on me to force me back into the chair, to force me back into the box he had built for me." I caught his wrist. I didn't just block him. I gripped his wrist with a strength that made him gasp. I squeezed until I felt the bones grind together. "Don't touch me," I said. My voice wasn't the raspy whisper of the last few days. It was a baritone rumble, clear, sharp, and terrifyingly steady. It carried to every corner of the silent room. Broderick flinched. He tried to pull away, but I held him fast. He looked into my eyes, and for the first time he saw the truth. He saw that the fog was gone. He saw that there was no dementia. There was only judgment. He pulled his arm free and stumbled back, rubbing his wrist. He looked at Vanessa, who was standing on the coffee table, her mouth open in a silent scream of confusion. "What is happening?" Broderick yelled, his voice cracking. "Dad, sit down." "You are ruining the party," and I looked at him. I looked at the wine stains on the carpet. I looked at the strangers desecrating my home. "I am not ruining the party," I said. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out the thick envelope I had been guarding. I slapped it onto the coffee table with a sound like a gunshot. "I am taking out the trash." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. I looked around the room, making eye contact with the strangers who had been drinking my wine and laughing at my expense. "The party is over," I announced. "This is private property, and you are all trespassing." A man in a leather jacket stepped forward, sneering. "Who is this geezer, Broderick? Get your old man under control." I turned my head slowly to look at him. "I am the man who owns the roof over your head," I said, "and the police are 2 minutes away. If you are not out of my house by the time they get here, you will be leaving in handcuffs." The room erupted into chaos. But I didn't move. I stood my ground, the master of my domain, watching the rats scurry as the lights finally came on. "You like screens, don't you, Vanessa?" I asked, my voice cutting through the murmurs of the confused crowd. I walked over to the massive 85-inch television mounted above the fireplace. It was the centerpiece of the room, the altar they worshipped at. I pulled the HDMI cable from the cable box and plugged it into my laptop, which I had placed on the side table moments before. The screen flickered black, then blue, then resolved into a sharp, high-definition image. It was the night vision footage from 3 weeks ago. The timestamp in the corner read 11:42 p.m. The room on the screen was undeniable. It was the master bedroom upstairs. The woman in the bed was Beatrice, frail and terrified. The woman standing over her wearing a silk robe that belonged to my wife was Vanessa Broderick, stepped forward, squinting. "What is this?" he demanded. "Is that Mom?" "Watch," I commanded. I hit play. The audio boomed through the speakers. I had just reconnected. The sound of Vanessa's voice, shrill and cruel, filled the living room. "You are useless," she hissed on the recording. "Broderick is drowning in debt because of you. Why don't you just die and save us the trouble?" A collective gasp swept through the room. The guests, the strangers who had been drinking my wine and trashing my home, suddenly looked sober. They stared at the screen in horror, watching as Beatrice gasped for air, reaching for her heart. Medications watching as Vanessa stood there, arms crossed, waiting for her to stop moving. Vanessa screamed. It was a sound of pure animal panic. "Turn it off! It is fake! It is a deep fake!" He made it up. She lunged for the laptop. But I was faster. I slammed the lid shut. But the image was already burned into 50 pairs of retinas. The silence in the room was heavy, thick with judgment. The woman in the silver dress who had bumped into me earlier covered her mouth with her hand. You let her die, she whispered. You killed her, Broderick stood frozen. He looked at Vanessa, then at the blank screen, then back at Vanessa. His face was pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a hook. Ness, he stammered. You said she died in her sleep. You said you found her in the morning. She lied, I said coldly. Just like she lied about the birthday trip. Just like she lied about loving you. Vanessa turned on him, desperate, defensive. It was an accident, Broderick. She was old. It was her time. I was just trying to help us, help you get the money. The money, I repeated. The money you were so eager to spend. Let us talk about the money. I reached into the envelope on the coffee table and pulled out the second document. It was a bank statement, a printout of the joint account Broderick shared with Vanessa, the one I had been secretly monitoring for months. I highlighted a series of transactions in bright yellow marker. I walked up to Broderick and shoved the paper against his chest. Read it, I said. Broderick looked down. His eyes scanned the lines, transaction after transaction, wire transfers, Venmo payments, cash withdrawals, all going to one. Name Rico Hernandez. Who is Rico? Broderick asked, looking up, his brow furrowed in confusion. Vanessa went white. She took a step back, her heels wobbling on the carpet. He is nobody, she said quickly. Just a trainer, my tennis instructor, $150,000 for tennis lessons, I asked. My voice was dry, devoid of emotion. $150,000. Broderick, that is the bridge loan you needed. That is the liquidity crisis. That is the money you stole from your mother's retirement fund, laundered through your wife's account, and sent directly to her boyfriend in Miami. Broderick looked at the paper again. Then he looked at Vanessa. The realization hit him like a physical blow. It wasn't just greed, it was humiliation. He had been cuckolded. He had been played. He had sold his soul to pay for his wife's lover to live in luxury. Rico, he whispered. The guy from the gym, the guy you said was gay. He is not gay, Vanessa, I said. He is 24 years old, and he just bought a Porsche with your inheritance something inside. Broderick snapped. It was a primal, ugly break. He dropped the paper. He let out a roar, a sound of pure, inarticulate rage, and lunged at her. He didn't see his wife anymore. He saw the thief. He saw the betrayal. You bitch, he screamed, grabbing her by the shoulders and shaking her so hard her head snapped back. You gave him my money, my money. Vanessa clawed at his face, screaming for help. The guests backed away, terrified, knocking over chairs and lamps. It was chaos, it was violence, it was the ugly truth of their marriage exposed for everyone to see. I didn't intervene. I let them tear each other apart for a moment, let them feel the physical manifestation of the rot they had cultivated. Then I stepped between them. I grabbed Broderick by the collar of his velvet jacket and shoved him back. He stumbled, tripping over the coffee table and falling onto the wine-soaked rug. Enough, I barked. Stand up. You are pathetic, both of you. Broderick lay there panting, blood trickling from a scratch on his cheek. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with tears. Dad, she stole it. She learned from the best, I said. You tried to steal my life, Broderick. You tried to steal my dignity. Now let me show you what you actually won. I pulled the final sheaf of papers from the envelope. I held them up like a judge holding a verdict. You think you own this house, I said. You think you have a power of attorney signed by Dr. Morris? You think you are in charge? I threw the papers into the air. They fluttered down around Broderick like snow. The house is sold, I said. I transferred the deed yesterday morning to a holding company. It belongs to Phoenix LLC. I am the president. You are trespassing on corporate property. Broderick picked up a sheet of paper. It was the quitclaim deed. The purchase price was $10. His eyes bulged. $10. You sold it for $10. And the trust, I continued. The $8 million in assets, the portfolio, the offshore accounts. It is all gone, Broderick. Moved it into an irrevocable charitable trust yesterday. The beneficiaries are the Stroke Association and a dog shelter. You get nothing, not a cent, not a brick, not a single bottle of wine. Vanessa was sobbing now, sitting on the floor, clutching her torn dress. You can't do that. We have rights, we have the medical certificate, Dr. Morris said. You were incompetent. Yes, Dr. Morris, I said. I almost forgot. I grabbed the remote control again. I pointed it at the TV. I switched the input to the local news channel. It was live. The banner at the bottom of the screen read, "Breaking news, FBI raids medical practice." On the screen, a reporter stood in front of a familiar office building. Flashing red and blue lights illuminated the scene. Two agents were leading a man in handcuffs toward a black SUV. The man was trying to hide his face, but there was no mistaking the expensive suit, the polished shoes, or the terrified eyes. It was Dr. Morris. Local authorities, in conjunction with the FBI, have arrested Dr. Allen. Morris, the reporter said, uncovering a massive fraud ring involving falsified medical records, elder abuse, and the illegal sale of prescription narcotics. Morris is accused of taking bribes to declare healthy seniors incompetent, facilitating the theft of millions in assets. I looked down at my son and his wife. They were staring at the screen, their mouths open, their faces drained of color. Your golden ticket just got arrested, I said. The certificate he signed is void. The power of attorney is worthless. You don't have guardianship. Broderick, you have a receipt for a bribe paid to a federal felon, and I sent the copy of that receipt to the FBI this morning. Broderick looked at me, terror finally replacing the rage. Dad, he whispered. Dad, please, you sent it to the FBI. I didn't answer. I heard sirens in the distance growing louder, getting closer. They weren't coming for the doctor this time. They were coming for the party. I looked at my watch. It was 8:10. Checkmate, I said. The wail of sirens outside was not a warning. It was a crescendo. The strobe lights of the patrol cars cut through the living room windows, painting the walls in violent, alternating flashes of red and blue. The guests who had been so arrogant moments before were now scrambling like rats on a sinking ship, overturning chairs and slipping on the wine-soaked carpet, in their desperation to escape the blast radius, but the front door was already blocked. A phalanx of uniformed officers marched into the foyer, their boots heavy on the hardwood Beatrice had polished for decades. They didn't ask questions. They didn't look confused. They moved with the precision of a team that had been briefed with irrefutable evidence. I stood by the fireplace, the eye of the storm, watching the chaos unfold with the detached calm of a demolition expert watching the charges blow. That is her, I said, pointing a steady finger at Vanessa. She was trying to crawl behind the sofa. Her designer dress ruined her face, a mask of smeared mascara and terror, too. Officers descended on her, pulling her to her feet, roughly. Vanessa shrieked, kicking and spitting like a feral animal. Get off me! Do you know who I am? I am the victim here. He is crazy. My father-in-law is senile. He is making it up. Save it for the judge. Lady, one of the officers growled, spinning her around, the cold, metallic click of handcuffs ratcheting tight. Cut through her screams, Vanessa Blackwood. You are under arrest for the aggravated abuse and depraved indifference resulting in the death of Beatrice Blackwood. We have the video evidence secured. She thrashed, her eyes wild, looking for anyone to save her, Broderick. Help me, tell them we were just trying to help, but Broderick wasn't looking at his wife. He wasn't looking at the police. He was staring past the commotion toward the open front door where the cold night air was rushing in. Standing in the threshold, illuminated by the flashing lights, were two men who definitely did not belong to the police force. They wore heavy wool coats and expressions of bored violence. One of them I recognized from the surveillance photos Wallace had shown me. It was the collector for the syndicate. Broderick owed, they didn't step inside, they didn't need to, they just stood there, a silent, terrifying reminder that there are debts the law cannot absolve. Broderick saw them, his face went from pale to a translucent, sickly gray. He knew the police would take his freedom, but those men waiting in the shadows would take his life. The bridge loan he had promised to repay by midnight was defaulted. The collateral. My house was gone. Broderick let out a sound that wasn't quite human. It was the whimper of a broken animal. He stumbled backward, retreating from the door, retreating from the men, retreating from the reality crashing down on him. He turned and saw me standing there. The only solid thing left in his dissolving world. He didn't walk, he collapsed. His knees hit the floor with a bone-jarring thud. He crawled toward me, his hands reaching out, grasping at the hem of my cardigan, his fingers staining the wool with the wine he had spilled. Dad. He sobbed, his voice high and thin, terrified. Dad, please, you have to stop them. You have to pay them. They are going to kill me. Dad, look at them. I looked at the men in the doorway. They met my gaze. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I simply shook my head once, a gesture of dismissal. Not my debt, not my house, not my problem. The men turned and vanished into the night, but the threat remained hanging in the air, heavier than the smoke. Broderick clawed at my legs, burying his face in my knees. Dad, please, I am sorry. I am so sorry. I will do anything. Just give me the money, undo the trust, sign the house back over. I will be good. I promise I will be the son you wanted. Just save me. He was invoking the bond he had severed. He was pleading to the father he had tried to erase. I looked down at the top of his head. I remembered the day he was born. I remembered promising to protect him from the world. But you cannot protect a man from himself. I reached down and pried his fingers off my sweater one by one. I don't have the money, Broderick, I said. My voice flat, cold, iron. I gave it all away, and even if I had it, I wouldn't spend a dime to buy you another day of lies. But I am your son, he wailed, raising his tear-streaked face to mine. I looked him in the eye and saw nothing but a stranger, a parasite who had consumed everything love had to offer and demanded more. My son died 3 days ago, I said, when he chose a yacht over his mother's funeral. You are just a man, trespassing on private property. I looked at the officer standing nearby. Officer, I said, remove him. He is bothering me, as the police hauled him up screaming and begging. I turned my back. I walked to the window and watched the flashing lights, knowing that for the first time in years, the house was finally clean. The heavy oak door clicked shut, severing the sound of my son's screams, as if I had cut a wire. The flashing blue lights painted the foyer walls in a rhythmic strobe, but the noise was gone. Broderick was gone. Dragged into the back of a squad car, still begging for a salvation that did not exist. I didn't watch him go. I didn't look through the peephole. I simply engaged the deadbolt one last time. The house was silent. It was a silence different from the grief of the last few days. It was the silence of a vacuum. The wine stains were still drying on the carpet. The shattered glass of my vintage Bordeaux still glittered on the hearth. The 85-inch television still displayed the frozen image of Dr. Morris in handcuffs. But none of it belonged to me anymore. This was just a crime scene inside a property owned by a shell company. I walked to the entryway table. My small canvas duffel bag was waiting there. It contained 3 shirts, 2 pairs of trousers, my shaving kit, and a road map of the American Southwest. I didn't take the photo albums. I didn't take Beatrice's jewelry. I didn't take the mahogany clock. Those things were artifacts of a life that had ended the moment my wife took her last breath and my son chose a yacht over her grave. I picked up the bag. It was light, unburdened. I walked out the front door, leaving it unlocked. The realtor would change the codes in the morning. The cleaning crew would come to scrub away the stains of Broderick's entitlement. The night air was crisp, biting my cheeks, my 2010. Ford F-150 sat in the driveway, its rusted wheel wells looking beautiful under the streetlights. It was the only thing I had kept out of the trust. It was reliable, it was honest. I threw the bag onto the passenger seat. I climbed into the driver's side, the worn leather seat molding to my back like an old friend. I put the key in the ignition. The engine turned over with a deep, throaty rumble. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a persistent buzzing, probably the police station allowing Broderick his one phone call. Or perhaps Wallace confirming the wire transfers were final. I pulled it out. The screen glowed in the dark. Cab, I didn't check the caller ID. I didn't unlock the screen when I rolled down the window. The metal trash can at the end of the driveway was waiting, its lid slightly ajar. I tossed the phone. It hit the metal rim with a sharp clang and disappeared into the garbage. I shifted the truck into drive. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't look at the house where I had spent 40 years, building a family that turned out to be a mirage. I looked forward. The road stretched out ahead of me, illuminated by my headlights, leading west. Beatrice always wanted to see the painted desert in Arizona. She never made it, but the Beatrice Blackwood Charity Fund would ensure that millions of dollars went to people who actually deserved help. As I turned onto the main road, leaving the subdivision behind, I realized something profound. I wasn't a grieving widower anymore. I wasn't a disappointed father. I wasn't a victim. I was Conrad Blackwood. I was 72 years old. I had $8 million in a charitable trust, a full tank of gas, and for the first time in my life, I was completely and utterly free. My son chose a party. I chose the open road, and I never looked back. If you enjoyed this story of justice, like and subscribe for more tales of resilience. Let me know in the comments if you would have done the same. Until next time, remember, respect is earned, not inherited. The hardest truth I had to learn at 72 was that unconditional love does not mean unconditional tolerance. For years, I mistook enabling my son for protecting him, allowing his greed to fester until it destroyed our family. We often fear that setting boundaries will cause us to lose people, but the reality is that the people who get angry when you set a boundary are the ones who benefited from you having none. I didn't destroy Broderick's life. I simply stopped shielding him from the consequences of his own choices. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is let their child face the storm alone, so they finally learn how to build their own shelter. Dignity is not negotiable, and respect is the only currency that truly matters. If you believe that loyalty is more important than inheritance, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice and resilience. Let me know in the comments, did I go too far, or did they get exactly what they deserved? I'll be reading your thoughts. Until next time.